The Linguaverse Episode 13, The Linguistic Self Arc 2, The Future and Philosophy of Language. Welcome back to the Linguaverse. If you've been with me since the beginning, you'll know that this isn't a space for shortcuts. We sit with words slowly, carefully, allowing their roots and rhythms to unfold. We take language seriously, because language takes us seriously, even when we don't realize it. So far in Arc 2, The Future and Philosophy of Language, we've followed the horizon of speech into some of its most challenging terrains. In Episode 9, AI and Synthetic Speech, we asked what happens when words leave the body entirely, when a voice is cloned or predicted, when a machine speaks into our ears without lungs, lips, or breath. We explored the unease and the wonder of that new frontier, the strange possibility that our words might outlive us in synthetic echoes. In Episode 10, The Evolution of English, we traced the most global tongue of our age, how English became a patchwork of invasions, trades, memes, and predictive texts. From Beowulf to TikTok, from Norman French beef to emoji hieroglyphs, English revealed itself not as a fortress of purity, but as a sponge of survival. In Episode 11, The Ineffable, we turn toward the limits, the places where language fails. Mystical silence, traumatic wordlessness, the poetry of music, the way meaning persists even when the tongue cannot hold it. The Ineffable reminded us that not everything can be spoken, and that sometimes silence carries more truth than speech. In Episode 12, Language and Consciousness, we faced the most profound tension yet. Does consciousness depend on language, or does it precede it? We explored Vygotsky's inner speech, William James's stream of thought, and the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis of linguistic relativity. We asked whether words shape awareness or merely trace its contours, and we touched the edges of silence, meditation, and trauma, where consciousness proves larger than words. Now, Episode 13 brings us to something even more intimate, the linguistic self. Because if consciousness is the stage of awareness, then the self is the actor who appears on it. And the question is, how much of that actor is scripted in words? Who am I? It's such a simple phrase. 3 words, 1 verb, 1 pronoun. And yet it carries a weight that philosophers, mystics, and psychologists have wrestled with for centuries. Who am I is not just a question of biology or psychology. It's a linguistic question. The I is a word. The am is a word. Even the very grammar of English presumes a certain kind of identity, a subject, a verb, a predicate. But what if the self is not stable? What if the words we use, names, labels, pronouns, diagnoses, nicknames, slurs, and affirmations don't just describe us but construct us? That is what we'll explore in this episode. How naming gives birth to the self. How labels empower and imprison. How society mirrors us through words. How inner speech shapes our identity. And how silence sometimes reveals the self more deeply than language ever could. This won't be abstract. It will be personal. Each of us carries words that have shaped us since birth. The name whispered when we were held for the first time. The labels given in school, the nicknames that stuck, the diagnoses that explained or constrained, the words we repeat in our own heads when no one is listening. All of these threads weave into what we call self. But here's the tension I want us to hold. If the self is made of words, what happens to us in silence? And if the self is larger than words, why do we cling so desperately to them? Let's begin where identity begins, with the act of naming. Naming the self. There is a reason every culture gives names. When a child is born, the first gift or burden they receive is not food or shelter or even touch. It is a name, a sound shaped by breath, placed upon them before they can speak, before they can resist, before they can understand. The power of I am in English, identity collapses into a single phrase, I am. It's simple, almost invisible. We don't notice its power because we use it constantly. I am tired, I am hungry, I am fine. I am broken, I am enough. Each statement fuses being with description. I am tired doesn't just report a passing state, it attaches tiredness to the core of identity. I am broken turns a feeling into an ontology. The verb to be in English is not neutral. It's glue. It sticks whatever follows to the self. Philosophers and theologians have noticed this for centuries. In the book of Exodus, when Moses asks God for a name, the reply comes, I am that I am. In Hebrew, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, a tautology, but also a mystery, being itself as identity. This is where language and self fuse at the deepest level. The act of saying I am is not just communication. It is creation. It conjures a self into existence. Names as spells names are not casual. To name something is to summon it. That's why so many myths and fairy tales revolve around names. Rumpelstiltskin loses his power when his true name is spoken. Demons in medieval grimoires could only be banished by calling their secret names. Even today in law, to name someone in a contract is to bind them. Our own names work the same way. Hear your name called in a crowded room, and your attention snaps instantly. It's not just a sound, it's you, but names are never neutral. A child named after a grandparent carries a lineage. A child with an unusual name may feel exoticized or alienated. A name mispronounced repeatedly in school can seed shame or resentment. A nickname can uplift or reduce. We are named before we can choose. And then we spend our lives negotiating what those names mean. Labels and identity beyond names. We inherit labels. Some labels describe roles: student, worker, parent, citizen. Others describe traits: shy, clever, lazy, and gifted. Some describe categories: male, female, non-binary, neurotypical, autistic, healthy, disabled. Labels are double-edged swords. On one hand, they empower. For many, receiving a diagnosis such as autism, ADHD, or bipolar is a relief. Suddenly, there is a name for the struggle, a way to explain, a community to belong to. The label gives form to what was once chaos. On the other hand, labels imprison. They reduce the richness of being to a box. You are this, and once spoken, others treat you accordingly. Sometimes you treat yourself accordingly. The label becomes prophecy. I've seen this in my own life, across my projects. Writing the Inversiverse showed me how language is used to condition, indoctrinate, and frame entire realities. The unfiltered human confronted the labels of emotion, envy, lust, anger, shame, guilt, apathy, control, and showed how shadow words shape shadow selves. The body knows revealed how the nervous system tells truths that words obscure. My inner child was broken, wrestled with the labels of childhood, broken, wounded, and resilient, and showed how naming trauma both frees and fixes it. Each piece of work reminded me, words don't just describe us. They build us, they haunt us, they heal us. The risk of reduction. But here's the risk. When we say I am too quickly, too rigidly, we reduce ourselves to a word. I am anxious. I'm worthless. I am not enough. These are not descriptions. They are identities. And because language shapes thought, they become self-fulfilling. The nervous system believes what the tongue repeats. This is why affirmations, for all their cliches, still carry power. I'm capable. I'm loved. I'm resilient. They rescript the self, not because they magically change the world, but because they reshape the inner dialogue that structures awareness. The self is linguistic, and the most dangerous words are often the ones we whisper to ourselves, cross-cultural selves. Not every language script is identified the same way. In English, I am fuses being with description, but in other languages, identity is framed differently. In Japanese, for instance, the word watashi I shifts depending on context. A man might use boku in informal settings, watashi in formal ones, and or among close friends. The self is not singular, but situational. In Zulu, the concept of Ubuntu, I'm because we are, places selfhood in relation, not in isolation. Identity is inherently collective, not individual. These linguistic differences matter. They reveal that what we call self is not universal. It is shaped by grammar, by pronouns, by cultural scripts. Language doesn't just describe the self, it creates it in different ways around the world. The fragile I, philosophers like Derek Parfit, have even argued that the self is an illusion, that what we call I is just a bundle of memories, sensations, and words strung together for convenience. When I think of this, I realize how fragile the self really is. Change the story, change the labels, and the self shifts. Traumatic words can fracture identity. Healing words can stitch it back together. This fragility isn't weakness, it's adaptability. The linguistic self can evolve. It can shed names, claim new ones, resist labels, rewrite affirmations. Reflection prompt. Think about the names and labels that have shaped you. Your given name, a nickname, a diagnosis, a role, a word someone else once spoke over you that still lingers. How do those words live in your body? Do they bring warmth, shame, pride, tension? Notice not just the thought, but the sensation. Language doesn't only live in the head, it lives in the nervous system. Activity: rewriting your I am spells goal. Notice how I am. Statements bind identity and consciously rescript them. Materials: notebook or notes app. Time: 15-20 minutes, plus a 2-minute daily check-in for a week. Steps 1. Write down 5 I am statements you use, aloud or internally. Include at least 2 that feel heavy. 2. For each, mark body response, warmth, tightness, neutral. 3. Reframe the heavy ones into truer, kinder, more precise lines, e.g., I'm failing, I'm learning through setbacks. 4. Read the revised list aloud, slowly. 5. Choose one line as a daily anchor. Repeat it each morning for 7 days. Reflect which lines constricted your body, which softened it. What shifted when you made the statement more specific or time-limited, right now? Versus I am. Which reframe felt authentic, not forced? The social mirror identity is never built alone. Even the words we whisper to ourselves, the I ams that define our inner landscapes, come to us from outside first. We inherit them, overhear them, absorb them. Language is social before it is personal, which means the self is always reflected to us through the words of others. This is what I call the social mirror. The idea that who we believe we are is not just self-expression, but also the accumulation of words spoken about us, to us, and over us. From childhood onwards, people hand us linguistic mirrors. Some show distorted reflections, like carnival glass. Others show us glimpses of truth. Over time, these reflections build into the identity we carry. The labels we don't choose growing up. I learned that the words used by others could carry as much weight as the words I used for myself. Sometimes more. Teachers, peers, and family all supplied labels. Some meant as encouragement, some as an insult, some casual, some diagnostic. The most powerful mirrors are often the ones we don't choose. Autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, bipolar type 2. These clinical words have been part of my landscape. They are not words I picked up like hobbies or nicknames. They came through professionals, reports, and systems, and once spoken, they began to shape how others saw me and how I saw myself. There is a strange duality in such words. On one hand, they bring relief. A name can give coherence to confusion. Behaviors, patterns, and difficulties suddenly make sense. It's not random, it's not failure. It has a name. On the other hand, such words can feel like cages. Once written in a file, they become permanent shadows. Employers, doctors, friends, all read you through the lens of those labels. You're autistic. You have ADHD. You are bipolar. The subtle shift from you have to you are is profound. It collapses the condition into identity, and many are unaware they do this. The weight of words in diagnosis. Take the word disorder. It is baked into each diagnosis. Autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and bipolar disorder. Disorder suggests chaos, deviation, and malfunction. It positions difference as a deficit. But is it always a deficit? Some days, autism feels less like a disorder and more like a different mode of perception. A heightened awareness of patterns, of details, of textures in language itself. A focus that cuts through distraction. Some days, ADHD is not just a deficit, but a dynamism. The ability to leap between ideas, to see connections others miss, to follow curiosity like a flame, and be hyper-focused on tasks and interests at hand. Even bipolar, with its painful swings, sometimes carries its own strange gifts. The depth of melancholy can bring empathy. The height of hypomania can bring creativity, intensity, and productivity. Yet the language of disorder rarely captures this nuance. Instead, the word frames the experience primarily in terms of lack, dysfunction, and impairment. It narrows the mirror. This is the danger of diagnostic language. It explains, but it also constrains. The double mirror of stigma and belonging once spoken, diagnostic labels create communities as well as cages. To say I am autistic is to step into a vast conversation, one filled with research, activism, advocacy, memes, and shared struggles. To say I have ADHD is to meet others who laugh knowingly at the half-finished projects and impulsive tangents. To say I live with bipolar is to join a lineage of writers, artists, and thinkers who wrestled with mood and meaning. The same words that stigmatize also connect. The mirror shows you not just yourself, but others, and sometimes that reflection is healing. Language builds communities. Communities build identity. Identity builds self. Society scripts. The social mirror is not neutral. Certain words dominate how conditions are understood. Sufferer, patient, victim. These frame people as passive, as afflicted, as broken. Rarely do we hear navigator, innovator, seer, or maker. Even media headlines shape public perception. Bipolar killer, ADHD epidemic, autism crisis. The words are sensational, reductionist, and heavy with implication. They don't describe lived experience, they script fear, pity, and distance. When these scripts circulate, they seep into how others treat you and how you treat yourself. The internalization of language. Here is where the social mirror fuses with the inner one. When people repeat certain words about you long enough, you begin to repeat them yourself. I'm difficult, I'm broken, I'm too much, I am not enough. These become internal scripts, whispered inside even when no one else is speaking. Language colonizes the inner landscape. But there are counterscripts too. Communities, loved ones, and self-advocates create new words. I am neurodivergent, I'm creative, I am resilient, I am not disordered, just different. These words begin to reframe the mirror. My projects as counter mirrors looking back, I see how each of my works has been an attempt to reclaim the mirror of identity. In the Linguiverse, I analysed how society frames reality through propaganda, marketing, and indoctrination, all forms of linguistic mirrors shaping perception. In the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe, I spoke openly about shadow emotions, giving language to the unspeakable, breaking the mirrors of silence that distort human experience. In The Body Knows, I explored how memory and meaning are stored in flesh, not just words, a reminder that selfhood is more than linguistic reflection. In My Inner Child Was Broken, I gave words to wounds often hidden, showing how language both names pain and begins healing it. Each project was a rebellion against imposed mirrors, and an attempt to build new ones, more honest, more expansive, more liberating. Activity, the mirror log goal. Track the labels others use and you absorb and practice counter-naming. Materials, a small card or phone note that you can access all day. Time micro-logging across 3-5 days, 20-minute weekly review. Steps 1. For 3-5 days, jot any identity words directed at you, labels, roles, diagnoses, complements, dicks. 2. Next to each entry, note body signal, heat, pulse, breath, tension. 3. Write a counter word that reframes, expands the label, e.g., disorganized counters to dynamic needs a system. 4. Weekly sort entries into fuel, friction, false. 5. Craft a 2-sentence mirror manifesto using fuel words. Reflect which words stick, which bounces off. How does a single word change your posture, breath, or choices? What community language, online, offline, do you want more of? The fragility of the social self. The self that exists in the social mirror is fragile. It changes with context. It shifts with the company. It bends under pressure. You might feel one self at work, another with friends, another with family. The words spoken in each space pull different selves into being. This fragility is not failure, it is flexibility. But it can also be exhausting, especially when the mirrors conflict. Autism might make one self hyper-aware of sensory overwhelm, while ADHD pulls another self into restless curiosity, while bipolar swings shift the lens entirely. Each diagnosis is not just a condition, but a different reflection of self in society's eyes. Navigating these mirrors is part of the work of living. The social mirror is inescapable. We are linguistic beings reflected through linguistic others, but we are not powerless. By noticing which words stick, by rewriting the scripts, and by building new communities, we can change the reflection. The self is never just what we say. It is also what is said about us. And learning to navigate that interplay between the inner and the outer, the self and the society, is one of the deepest challenges of identity. In a multiplicity, we often talk about finding your voice as though the self had only one, a singular, consistent speaker behind the curtain of consciousness. But if we pause and listen carefully to our inner worlds, a different reality emerges. The self is not a solo performance, it is a chorus. The self, as polyphony Russian thinker Mikhail Bakhtin described novels not as monologues of an author, but as polyphonic, multi-voiced. Characters speak with their own tones, intentions, and rhythms. The text becomes a dialogue of perspectives. I believe the same is true of us. The self is not one voice, but many. Internalized parents, teachers, friends. Childhood selves, adult selves, imagined future selves. Voices of compassion, voices of criticism. Fragments of diagnosis, echoes of trauma, scripts of hope. Sometimes these voices harmonize. Other times they clash, pulling us in opposite directions. This is not pathology, it is humanity. The inner dialogues we carry. When I sit in silence, I notice how quickly the voices surface. One voice is analytical, breaking down words, pulling at etymologies. Another is protective, always scanning for danger. Another is playful, making absurd connections, delighting in word games. Another is weary, telling me to slow down, reminding me of limits. None of these voices is the whole truth, but together they form something closer to who I am. It is a mistake to believe in a singular I. The self is not a single voice, but a negotiation between many. Conflict as language. Where do these voices come from? From language itself. Every time someone names us, praises us, diagnoses us, or insults us, their words lodge inside. They become part of our internal lexicon. Later, they resurface as inner speech. Think of how quickly the word lazy, once spoken to a child, can become an inner critic repeated for decades, or how brilliant can echo as encouragement long after the teacher who first said it has vanished from memory. Language becomes multiplicity. We internalize not just words, but their speakers. My writing is dialogue. Looking at my own work, I see evidence of this polyphony. The Inversiverse is a voice that questions, pulls apart illusions, and exposes the manipulations of culture. It is the voice of skepticism and critique, sharpened by years of watching systems deceive. My inner child was broken speaks from a different register, vulnerable, raw, wounded, but also seeking to heal. It is the voice of the child self still alive inside, asking to be heard at last. The unfiltered human on the fringe gave space to emotions I once silenced. These voices were never gone. They were simply pushed underground. By writing, I gave them language again. The body knows was another voice, quieter, embodied, insisting that truth lives not just in words, but in flesh, in breath, in sensation. Each project was not one voice, but a dialogue, sometimes even an argument. My writing has been less about finding a single voice and more about weaving the many together. The danger of silenced voices. Not all inner voices are welcome. Some are pushed aside, silenced, denied. The voice that says, I am angry. The voice that says, I'm afraid. The voice that says, I want. Silencing them doesn't erase them. It drives them underground where they fester. When trauma cuts language away, those voices remain ineffable but powerful. When society mocks or punishes difference, those voices become stigmatized, shamed. When we police ourselves too harshly, those voices are left unheard. And yet, integration requires listening to them all, even the ones we dislike, especially the ones we dislike. Polyphony as strength. It might sound chaotic, all these voices, clamoring, contradicting. But polyphony is not a weakness. It is resilience. A singular self is brittle. One crack and it shatters. A polyphonic self is adaptive. If one voice falters, another carries the song. This is why diversity of inner speech is not a flaw but a resource. By learning to listen, to dialogue, to balance, we become more whole. Activity, dialogue of voices, polyphony practice, goal make inner voices explicit and integrate their needs. Materials paper, 2 pens of different colors optional. Time 25-30 minutes. Steps 1. Name 2 inner voices in this moment, e.g., the critic and the builder. 2. Give each voice a short profile, what it protects, fears, wants. 3. Set a timer for 12 minutes. Write their dialogue, no censoring. 4. Underline any requests each voice makes, e.g., proof, rest, play. 5. Draft a 3-line truce contract that gives each voice a turn this week. Reflect which voice surprised you. What changes when both voices feel heard? Is there a third voice that needs a cameo? The self is not a monologue. It is a dialogue. Every word we carry is a voice we once heard. Every silence we hold is a voice we once lost. Together, they form the chorus of identity. To live well is not to silence the voices, nor to let one dominate forever, but to host them, to let the critic, the child, the dreamer, the skeptic, the wounded, and the healed all have their place. Polyphony is not chaos. It is the music of being human, trauma, silence, and the lost self. There's a phrase people often reach for when they've lived through something overwhelming. I don't have the words. I've heard it, I've read it, and I've felt it. But the more I sit with this phrase, the more I realize it doesn't quite capture what's happening. The unspeakable self. It's not that there are no words. It's that the words available don't fit. Or that the words would feel like a betrayal if I forced them out. Or that my body knows something my mouth can't yet carry. So I prefer to think of it differently. Trauma isn't wordless, it's misworded. The lexicon we've been handed isn't built to hold it. When I look back at my own experiences, silence wasn't emptiness. It was crowded. My nervous system was flooded, my body overloaded, my thoughts racing. But no vocabulary was wide enough. Silence became the only vessel large enough to contain it. This is the paradox of the unspeakable self. The more intense the experience, the less adequate the language. And yet, in those very gaps, meaning still lives. Silence as survival neuroscience confirms what survivors have always known. Under extreme stress, the brain can switch speech off. Broca's area, the region that gives us words, goes dark. The amygdala, the alarm bell of the brain, takes over. Bessel van der Kolk describes this in The Body Keeps the Score. Trauma isn't just psychological, it's physiological. The body floods with stress hormones, the survival circuits lock in, and suddenly words vanish. The cry, the scream, the shutdown. These become the language of the body when the tongue cannot move. And silence, in this sense, is not failure, it's intelligence. The nervous system knows that to speak in certain moments is to risk more harm. Better to freeze, better to shut down, better to let silence shield you. History is full of silences like this. Communities that endured slavery, genocide, and forced migration often carried their pain in silence. Not because they didn't understand it, but because speech would have been dangerous. Silence was a strategy. So when I hear, I don't have words, I think the silence was a kind of wisdom. It wasn't emptiness, it was survival. When labels colonize the self, but silence doesn't just come from within, it's also imposed from outside. One of the most violent ways this happens today is through the colonization of the self by psychiatric labels. I know this personally. I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, and bipolar type 2 several years ago. At first, I thought the labels would give clarity, maybe even freedom. But what I found was the opposite. Each label carved me up into categories I didn't choose. Each one reduced me to a checklist. The more I read my reports, the more I realized they weren't describing me. They were describing behaviors framed through deficit. If I was silent as a child, it wasn't because I was thoughtful, shy, or reflective. It was because I was autistic. If I struggled with focus, it wasn't because I was bored or unstimulated. It was because I had ADHD. If I cycled through moods, it wasn't because I was responding to the world with intensity. It was because I was bipolar. And suddenly I wasn't mine anymore. It was colonized by labels. Foucault called this biopower, the way institutions define, categorize, and govern bodies through language. Ivan Illich, in Medical Nemesis, warned of medicalization, the process by which human suffering is reframed as medical pathology, stripping away social, political, and nutritional context. I see this in the way people speak about mental health today. Diagnostic rates soar, and public conversations trivialize them. Everyone's autistic these days. Everyone has ADHD now. These comments miss the deeper reality. It's not that human beings have suddenly changed. It's that systemic forces have redefined what counts as normal and what counts as pathology. The labels don't just describe, they create. And in doing so, they fracture the linguistic self, the way I narrate who I am. The orchestration of pathology, I can't talk about labels without talking about the conditions that make them proliferate. Look around, and you see a society that breeds dysregulation. Trauma cycles passed down through families. Nutrition collapses under the weight of ultra-processed food. Screens hijack attention. Communities fracture under economic pressure. And then, when people inevitably struggle, the system swoops in with diagnoses. Take food. Aspartame, found in countless diet drinks, has been linked in studies to disruptions in neurotransmitters. A 2022 Frontiers in Nutrition review highlighted how artificial sweeteners may alter the gut microbiome in ways that affect mood and cognition. Sugar spikes create inflammation that doesn't just hit the body, it hits the brain. Harvard researchers have shown correlations between high sugar diets and depression. Yet when someone feels low, irritable, foggy, instead of asking what's in their food, we ask what's in their brain chemistry. We hand out a label, or think about childhood behavior. A quiet child who plays alone might be shy, reflective, or cautious. But assessment frameworks interpret that as a symptom of autism. A restless child might be curious, energetic, and imaginative, but in a classroom geared towards stillness, that becomes ADHD. The questions don't ask why, they ask which disorder. In this way, pathology is orchestrated, not simply by biology, but by systems that strip context, impose categories, and then enforce them through language. Fragmented selves, trauma, and dissociation trauma fragments the self. Sometimes it's overt dissociation, the splitting off of unbearable memories or states. Sometimes it's subtle, a silence that hides whole parts of identity. Freud called this repression. Van der Kolk shows how the body stores what the mind cannot integrate. Dissociation is not madness, it's survival, but the cost is fragmentation. The linguistic self, the inner voice that narrates who I am, becomes scattered. Some parts are loud, others are mute. Some are acceptable, others are exiled. When labels enter this picture, they don't heal the fragmentation, they cement it. Instead of reintegrating voices, they assign them categories. Disordered. Instead of asking what each voice needs, they ask how each voice fits into the Diagnostic Statistics Manual DSM. The result is a lost self. Not because the self has disappeared, but because it has been buried under layers of silence and imposed words. Healing through naming. Yet healing doesn't come from rejecting words altogether. It comes from finding new ones, words that liberate instead of colonize. Narrative therapy is built on this insight. Michael White and David Epstein argued that problems are not identities. By reauthoring your story, by separating yourself from the problem, you reclaim agency. I've seen this in my own work. Writing the Linguaverse allowed me to question indoctrination and perception. Writing My Inner Child Was Broken helped me trace the ways early wounds shaped me, not as destiny, but as material for transformation. The unfiltered human gave me a space to speak the raw truths society often silences, and the body knows became a way to honor how language lives in physiology. Each project wasn't just content creation, it was reclamation. It was me stitching fragments into dialogue, polyphony instead of silence. Bakhtin's idea of polyphony, that the self is not one voice but many, resonates here. Trauma tries to silence voices, labels try to flatten them, but writing gave me back the dialogue. It reminded me that the self is multiple, alive, and conversational, and that's where healing begins, not by accepting imposed categories, but by finding words that fit the truth of your lived body. Reflection prompt. Think back to a time when someone else's label silenced you. Maybe it was a diagnosis, maybe a stereotype, maybe a family script. How did that imposed word shape how you saw yourself? And if you could choose your own words for that experience, what would they be? Activity. The one sentence you haven't said goal. Move a guarded truth from body to language on your terms. Materials, private space, paper, timer, glass of water. Time 20 minutes. Steps 1. Ground 2 minutes. Feel feet, lengthen exhale. 2. Write one sentence you've never said aloud. Keep it precise. 3. Read it once out loud. Pause. 4. Body scan 60 seconds. Where do you feel it? Name 3 sensations. 5. Write a 3-line care plan, what you need after speaking it. Walk, call, music, rest. 6. Close with a reclaimed line that honors you now, e.g., I told the truth to myself. I'm safe. Reflect, did speaking it increase clarity, relief, or activation? What would saying it safely to someone look like, if ever? Which word in the sentence carries the most charge? Can it be reframed? Trauma, silence, and the lost self. 3 threads woven tightly together. Trauma silences because the nervous system knows survival. Society silences again through labels and pathologization. And the self, caught in between, risks vanishing under the weight of imposed vocabularies. But the self is never truly lost, it waits. It waits in silence, in the body, in the fragments of inner dialogue. And healing begins when we dare to speak again, not with the system's words, but with our own. That is the task of the linguistic self, not to accept labels, but to reauthor, not to reduce, but to expand, not to be spoken about, but to speakers. And from here, we can step toward philosophy, to ask not just how language wounds, but how it can reveal consciousness itself, digital selves. When I think about the self, it's easy to imagine the body in a room, speaking, moving, breathing. A face, a voice, gestures, the traditional anchors of identity. But the digital age has rewritten that script. More and more, we meet one another not in rooms, but on screens. And on those screens, the self is not a single body, but a performance fractured into multiple avatars, usernames, hashtags, and memes. This is what I call the rise of digital selves, the ways language online creates, curates, and multiplies who we are. The moment I log in, I'm not just James. I'm a username, I'm a profile picture, I'm a string of hashtags, I'm a voice in a thread, a comment under a video, a post that might be liked or ignored. And each of those selves speaks differently. Each one is shaped not only by what I want to say, but by the linguistic culture of the platform where I say it. In physical life, language already shifts. We code switch between work and family, between friends and strangers. But online, the scale multiplies. One account for work emails, one account for family messages, one account for social media. This is not just psychology, it's linguistics. Because each self speaks in a different register, a different dialect, sometimes a different language entirely. And the digital space makes this multiplicity visible in ways no previous age could. Usernames as avatars. Let's start with usernames. Offline, we are given names at birth. They may be shortened, nicknamed, or mispronounced, but they tether us to family and history. Online, we get to choose. A username is a self-construction. It might be playful, anonymous, ironic, or aspirational. It might hide the body entirely, no gender, no age, no geography, or it might exaggerate those traits for effect. Think about the linguistic creativity of usernames. Deliberate misspellings, number substitutions, references to pop culture, and mashups of words. A username is often the first linguistic act of a digital self. I've noticed how usernames shape expectation. A serious professional handle in a work email primes me to expect formality. A playful pseudonym in a gaming forum primes me to expect banter. Before a word of dialogue is exchanged, the username has already spoken. This isn't trivial, it's performative linguistics. As Judith Butler argued about gender, performance isn't decoration, it creates identity. A username is not just a mask, it is part of the self, a self constructed through language. Hashtags as identity markers. At first, hashtags were just organizational tools, a way to tag content. Food, music, but quickly they became more than metadata. They became identity markers. Post me T2, BLM, love is not just to describe content. It's to align yourself with a movement, to declare belonging, to signal values. Hashtags are linguistic flags. What fascinates me is the way hashtags compress identity into language. A whole history of struggle, solidarity, and meaning can be condensed into a single string of characters. And once that tag is attached to your post, your digital self becomes part of that collective speech act. Hashtags also create micro-identities. Book Talk, Gamer Life, Neurodivergent Squad. Each one carves out a digital tribe, a place where particular forms of speech thrive. If I step into Book Talk, I enter a linguistic ecosystem of recommendations, tropes, abbreviations, and in-jokes. My language shifts to match, and so does my digital self. Memes as self-projection. But perhaps the most fascinating form of digital selfhood is the meme. Memes are often dismissed as jokes, but linguistically, they are compressed self-expressions. They are templates, cultural hieroglyphs. By posting or resharing a meme, I'm not just laughing, I'm projecting an aspect of myself. Take the Leonardo DiCaprio smug face meme. You've seen it. A still from Django Unchained, DiCaprio as Calvin Candy, holding a drink, face tilted in condescending amusement. Used online, that image becomes a mirror of self-performance. Post it with the right caption, and I'm saying, I recognize the absurdity of this moment. I see the irony. I'm not fooled. It's not just an image. It's a linguistic move, a way of saying, this is me right now. Not through words alone, but through shared cultural shorthand. What makes memes powerful is their polyphony. One image can host thousands of voices. Each caption tweaks the meaning, but the underlying self-performance remains. Irony, detachment, knowingness. Memes let us perform selves without saying, this is who I am. The language of the meme does the speaking for us. Multiplying selves, all of these points point to a larger truth. Online, the self is multiple. I might present myself on LinkedIn, another on Instagram, and another on Reddit. Each one uses a different language. On LinkedIn, my English is polished and professional. On Instagram, it's casual, emoji-laden, image-driven. On Reddit, it might be anonymous, sarcastic, and full of in-group slang. Each of these is me, but they are not the same me. They are digital selves, fragmented, curated, shaped by linguistic performance. Sociologist Irving Goffman described life as a stage, with front-stage performances and backstage realities. Online, the stages multiply. There is no single backstage. There are only layers of performance, each one tied to a linguistic community. Philosophical tension, liberation, or prison? Are digital selves expansions of identity, liberating us to be multiple, creative, playful? Or are they prisons, fragmenting us, trapping us in endless performance, leaving us unsure which self is real? Linguistically, the answer is both. Every username, hashtag, and meme opens possibilities. They allow creativity, solidarity, and exploration. But everyone also imposes constraints. Each platform enforces norms. Each meme shapes the range of acceptable captions. Each hashtag pulls us into a group identity, even if only temporarily. We live in the paradox. Digital selves multiply freedom, but they also multiply masks. And sometimes, after wearing too many masks, the face itself begins to blur. Reflection prompt. Think about your last week online. Did you write a work email? Send a casual message to a friend? Post something on social media? Maybe comment anonymously somewhere. Now notice the shifts in your language across those contexts. The tone, the grammar, the use of emojis or not, the choice of words. Each one was a digital self speaking. Each one was you, but a different you. Activity, 3 registers, 1 new goal. See how platform context reshapes your voice and choose the mix intentionally. Materials, 3 real samples, a work email, a DM text, a public post comment. Time 30, 40 minutes. Steps 1, print paste all 3. 2, mark features, tone, formal ironic, sentence length, emojis, hedges, power verbs, passive versus active. 3, annotate what each register optimizes, safety, speed, belonging status. 4, draft a hybrid micro-style guide, 5 rules you'll carry across contexts, e.g. short sentences for clarity, 1 concrete detail per paragraph, no auto-replies unless scheduling. 5, rewrite 1 recent post email using the hybrid guide. Reflect which register feels most alive in your body. Where do you overperform or self-shrink? What tiny rule would make your digital language more you? Digital selves are not separate from us. They are us, but shaped by the linguistic architectures of the internet. Usernames as avatars, hashtags as flags, memes as masks and mirrors, emails, direct messages, DMs, comments, captions, each one a stage where a different self speaks. This multiplicity is both exhilarating and disorienting. It frees us to play with identity, but it also fragments us into endless performances. And as I step back, I see the same truth that has run through this whole episode. The linguistic self is never singular. It is always many voices, many selves, many performances. Online, those voices simply become louder, faster, more visible. And the challenge is not to collapse them into one, but to live with their multiplicity, to recognize that the self has always been a chorus, and digital language has simply given the chorus more microphones. The transcendent self. When I think about the self, it's tempting to keep the discussion rooted in words, the stories we tell ourselves, the dialogues we carry, the labels we inherit. But what about the self that emerges when language drops away? What happens to identity when silence, stillness, or transcendence strips words from the scene? This is where we encounter the transcendent self, the self that exists, or perhaps dissolves, beyond language. Silence, a self I've described before, one of the most profound moments in my own life. A spiritual awakening during meditation. I wasn't trying to craft a philosophy. I wasn't reaching for a word. I was simply sitting in stillness. And then something opened. It felt like a portal, a sudden widening of perception, as if a door in my mind swung open to a larger reality. New perspectives and visions followed, not delivered in sentences or theories, but in a wordless clarity that altered how I saw life itself. In that moment, language wasn't there. Yet consciousness was brighter than ever, and the self, I thought I was dissolved into something larger. This experience left me with a paradox. If language builds the self, what do we call the self that arises without words? The no-self tradition, many mystical traditions point here. In Buddhism, there is the teaching of anatta, no permanent self. In meditation, practitioners report the fading of inner dialogue, the disappearance of I. The self, once thought to be solid, reveals itself as constructed, a cluster of sensations, thoughts, and linguistic labels that dissolve when left unspoken. Christian mystics describe similar states, sometimes in terms of union with God, sometimes in terms of silence. Meister Eckhart once wrote, "There is nothing so much like God as silence." Mystics of all traditions converge on this ineffable experience. When language falls away, something remains. But what it is and whether it counts as self is debated. Does the self need words? One argument says, without language there is no self. Identity is just a collection of sensations until words bind them into a narrative. By this view, my moment of wordless awakening was not a deeper self, but a temporary erasure, a lapse into raw consciousness without identity. The other argument says, the deepest self exists beyond words. The labels, the stories, the inner dialogues, those are masks. Strip them away, and what remains is the essence. Not less self, but more. I sit with this tension. In some ways, both are true. Without language, I lose the James who narrates his past, who plots his future, who edits podcasts and writes books. But without language, I also discover the James who is more than narrative, who simply is. The self in dissolution. In mystical traditions, this dissolution is not feared but embraced. To dissolve into silence is to touch the deeper ground of being. In neuroscience, these experiences sometimes map onto altered states, reduced activity in the default mode network of the brain, the system that keeps the narrative self looping. When the loop quiets, a sense of spaciousness, timelessness, or union arises. It's tempting to reduce this to brain mechanics, but lived experience suggests more. These moments feel more real, not less. And for many, they reshape identity long after the silence ends. Word anchors and the edge of dissolution. Even here, words try to anchor. Phrases like I am. Mantras are repeated until they dissolve into silence. A single word can become a threshold, the last rung of a ladder before stepping into the wordless. I found I am particularly powerful. It holds the tension perfectly. It asserts existence, but without qualification. Not I'm James, not I'm a writer, not I'm autistic or bipolar or anything else. Just I am, being itself. Repeat it silently, again and again, and eventually even those two words dissolve. What remains is presence. Reflection prompt repeats silently for just a moment. I am. Feel the words. Notice how they locate you. They affirm your existence. Now set them aside. Sit in the silence that follows. Notice what remains. Activity. I am into silence. Goal touch identity beneath language. Notice what remains. Materials timer. Quiet place. Time 10, 12 minutes. Steps 1. Sit comfortably. Soften gaze or close eyes. 2, 3 minutes. Silently repeat I am on the exhale. 3, 5 minutes. Drop the phrase. Rest in wordless awareness. 4 minutes. Journal sensations only. No analysis. Reflect in silence. Did you feel less you or more you? What qualities appeared? Spaciousness, calm, resistance. How does this state influence the next thing you say? As we close this episode, I want to pull the threads together. The linguistic self is not simple. It is fractured and multiplied, shaped by labels, digital selves, trauma, and inner voices. It is a chorus, not a solo. Sometimes those voices harmonize. Sometimes they clash. Sometimes one is silenced. And yet, through it all, language has been a scaffold. It has built my sense of self. It has broken it, and it has rebuilt it. When I was young, words from others defined me before I had a chance to define myself. Later, diagnostic labels and cultural scripts tried to cage me. Through writing, reflection, and conversation, I've reclaimed some of those words, reshaped them, turned them into tools instead of chains. Looking back, my life feels like a linguistic timeline, a journey of words. Words given to me, words taken from me, words I discovered, words I forged. And I wonder, what is your linguistic timeline? Reflection prompt trace how language has built, broken, and rebuilt your sense of self over your lifetime. What words were given to you as a child? What labels shaped your teenage years? What slogans, diagnoses, or identities carried you into adulthood? Which of those words felt like cages? Which felt like wings? And which words are you ready to leave behind or reclaim as you move forward? Activity. Linguistic timeline of self-goal map, how words labels built, broke, and rebuilt your identity. Materials a 3 en pedaç 4 paper. Markers. Time 30, 45 minutes. Steps 1. Draw a timeline from early childhood to the present. 2. At each stage, list 3 to 6 defining words, names, roles, diagnoses, nicknames, slogans. 3. Color code, cages, red, wings, green, inherited but unclear, yellow. 4. Choose one red to retire, cross out, write a replacement. 5. Choose one green to amplify, write where you'll use it this week. 6. Title the whole page with a present tense line that feels true today. Reflect which era stacked the most red words. Why? What relationships changed your language the most? What single word, if reclaimed, would change your posture tomorrow? And so we close episode 13, the linguistic self. We've walked through the many layers of identity, the inner dialogues, the trauma fractures, the digital avatars, the transcendent silences. We've seen how language both builds and breaks us, how it multiplies us, how it cages and liberates. The truth is simple, but never easy. The self is both spoken and unspoken, both fractured and whole, both the words we inherit and the silences we discover. This is why the work of language matters, because every word you speak to yourself, every label you carry, every silence you sit with, it all shapes the self you inhabit. In the next episode, episode 14, Language and Reality, we'll step out from the self into the world. If language shapes consciousness, what does it do to reality itself? How do words not only reflect the world but build it? And how might reclaiming language reshape the ground we all walk on? But for now, I leave you here with your own linguistic timeline, your own multiplicity, your own silence. Until next time, stay curious, stay awake to your own language, and remember, the self you speak is never the whole story. You've been listening to the Linguaverse. I'm James Miller.